Hello, vinyl community. Uh, Today I wanted to talk about a couple of records. I don't know about you. I've kind of got these albums that kind of they kind of fit together. They're kind of either they came out around the same time, or maybe musically they kind of relate to one another, even though they seemingly on the surface don't have any relation to one another, and maybe even in some ways are completely the opposite of one another. I have a lot of albums like that kind of musically connect. But there's two albums that I wanted to talk about today that just I'm sure I'm the only one who really kind of makes the connection between them. They came out right around the same time, um, high school years for me, um, and uh, and I listened to both of them, quite a bit during that time, and they are one. The first one is one I think everyone knows, Appetite for Destruction. I remember when this record came out. Um, it was really a breath of fresh air if you were kind of a hard rock or punk rock fan. Um, it, you know, hard rock music at that time, or metal, I don't know if you call this metal or hard rock, but at that time it was pretty much stuck in this, yeah, bands like Poison and Cinderella and White Lion and White Snake and the whole that whole genre, and that wasn't none of those bands seemed like they'd ever been inside of a rock and roll club before. And if you were into sweaty hard rock or punk rock music at the time, it was these guys looked like they came out of Vogue magazine, not out of a club. And then Guns N' Roses came around, and these guys, even though by today's standards they look pretty uh, pretty made up there, but at the time it seemed pretty real, and there was some real venom in the music, as opposed to some of that other stuff. And me and my friends listened to that tape in the car, all the time. Probably the next couple of years, that was one of the primary albums that was on there. But along that way, I discovered, I always had my ear open for new music, and I discovered another album. I think that came out in '87, and then shortly thereafter, there was a band that I had read a lot about, and this album became kind of another hit of sorts, but on a different level, which was Public Enemy's "Takes a Nation of Millions to Hold Us Back." Um, Probably my favorite rap album, hip hop album, um, right here, and it's a powerful, powerful album, both sonically and see the track listings there. You can see the guys, Chuck D, and both sonically and lyrically, this album punches you right between the eyes, and it was really in many ways is we tend to not think of music as kind of an educational process, but this album, it was the beginning of a lot of things, politically, culturally, socially, for me, and an eye-opening album. Even if at first you were a little bit, I remember hearing for the very first time hearing "Don't Believe the Hype," which has this, which is a pretty basic hip hop beat, and then adds this kind of screeching, which became the trademark of Public Enemy in a lot of ways. And little by little, I went out. I remember going to the store and buying this. And if you grew up where I grew up, I remember walking to the store and buying this, and I probably got some looks from a few people, believe it or not, as silly as that might seem, that would be buying this, and I just absorbed it. And I did a lot of studying and research to find out exactly what was being talked about. And so these albums, even though in a way they seem kind of maybe musically and philosophically different from one another, for me they weren't, because they both were a return to, or maybe pushing forward into a kind of realism that wasn't there before, at least by kind of FM radio standards of that period. Since then, I've moved beyond Guns N' Roses and into other kinds of music, but but the charm of that record is always there, and the brutality and the confusion that young people feel at that age, especially maybe a young man feels at that age, is all articulated um, right here. And for better or for worse, a lot of the things that Axl Rose said, and he said some very controversial things, I know, but I think that he was in many ways articulating something, a rage um, that was happening in the American middle class. The working class in America has taken a beating by the time the late 80s had come along, and there was a massive economic decline going on. And the pretty flower bands of the 1960s and the hope that was being generated by Peter, Paul, and Mary, well, those years were over. And Axl Rose and his band was speaking, whether you like it or not, to the American heartland. And Public Enemy was speaking to a very similar kind of rage, maybe to a slightly different audience, but they were both articulating an anger and rage at something that was happening inside the country, which was a massive economic decline that continues to this day. And there's a lot in Takes a Nation of Millions, a lot about prison populations and people being incarcerated for long periods of times. It's not just talk. If you look at the prison population in the United States since, say, 1970, the prison population in the United States since 1970 has increased 500%. 500%. And you think, well, why? Was there why was there an explosion in crime between 1970 and the 1990? 20-year period of time, there's a 500% increase. And a lot of that had to do with laws that were passed, drug laws that were passed in the United States. Drug laws that were passed in the United States that had certain political leaders that took the lead on changing those drug laws. That is, increasing the penalties for things like crack cocaine while keeping the penalties for cocaine very different. And that was done. One of the leaders of that was a senator named Joe Biden, and a senator who later became vice president of the United States, and then after that became the president of the United States. Joe said that he wanted to see anybody caught with a dime's worth of crack cocaine in their hand to face a lifetime in prison, and that was going to help clean up the American streets. And so it's an example of, by the time 1988, 1989, 1990, and Public Enemy started talking about the sense of betrayal that people felt. Sense of betrayal, both articulating a sense of betrayal about what was happening inside the country, and both for very similar reasons, and yet it came out very, very differently. There's a book that I reread sometimes that kind of relates to a lot of this, and if you're interested or inclined, I highly recommend this book. This will give you. Howard Zinn was a brilliant guy. He's gone now. This was maybe his magnum opus, but he wrote a lot about things happening inside the country. But this one, it gives you an overview of the history of Western history, and in particular history of the United States, but from a slightly different point of view than that you might hear in the textbooks. Usually what we read in school and in the textbooks and in the media is a kind of whitewash. And Howard Zinn doesn't doesn't let that whitewash exist. So I wanted to make this quick comparison between these two records. I still think they're both really good records and still powerful. Guns N' Roses maybe doesn't have the punch, and it might be hard for you to understand what I'm talking about because this maybe doesn't have the punch that it had when it first came out. But believe me when I tell you that compared to everything else that was on the radio at the time, this was a punch in America the way maybe, the Sex Pistols never really happened in the United States for the kids that were growing up in that period. I remember I was a little boy, but I remember reading in the newspaper about the tour when they came to the United States and the outrage, but it was very, very underground. They were playing clubs, and it wasn't really affecting the United States the way the Pistols had articulated the rage that those British kids felt in a declining economy. Margaret Thatcher had come, austerity, cutting back on social services, and there were no jobs. And the Pistols tapped into that and articulated it. And it's why they were considered such a public threat as they were. There's a good book on the period called England's Dreaming. It's on my shelf. I should have grabbed it. That really talks about that period of time in England when the punk movement began to happen, and in particular the rise and fall of the Pistols, all the way through the U.S. tour. Good book, great book, and a fun read too. And there's a great discography in the back of it that'll turn you on to a lot of great music. Anyway, I kind of want to make this equivalency. These two albums are forever ingrained in my mind together. And I used to have friends in my car at the time and be riding around and be clicking back and forth between these two albums like they came out together, like they were together. And friends would say, why are you listening to this now? And I'd say these just they just fit. And articulating the rage of a young Midwestern kid who was right in the middle of all that change that continues to this day. And those here's one last statistic I'll leave you with that maybe helps explain some of that anger that Public Enemy talked about. The United States today has 2.2 million people in the federal prison system. 2.2 million people in the federal prison system in the United States. That is more than China and Russia combined. We have more people in the federal prison system today in the United States than China. Two totalitarian countries that we often point to as putting people in jail for the wrong reasons. Most of those prisoners that are in jail are there for nonviolent. For all of us to think about and wonder why a lot of things are happening in the country today that make people mad and upset, and I think this is where a lot of that didn't begin here, but it really exploded here and exploded here. So thank you. Hope you got something out of that, and I appreciate you watching and appreciate your time. And thank you for those that have helped me and given me a shout out. I really appreciate it. And if I can do anything, please let me know. Thank you.